Okay, I think we're all set. Maybe if you could just start with what you know about, what you've heard about Sicily and the family there.
You want me to go
Both
as
my
far back as I
grandmothers.
know?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go back to my father's grandfather, which would be your great grandfather, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Great
Well, if it's your grandfather's, if it's my grandfather's grandfather, yeah.
right?
Okay.
Okay. I'm talking about your father's side.
Yeah.
Talking about that family tree.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Domenico Costantino, who was the businessman or wine merchant that I told you about.
Right.
He was born in Castro Reale. It's spelled as Castroreale. And he met Josepina, Giuseppina, Torchia, capital Torchia. She was born in Lingua Glossa. Lingua Glossa is spelled Linguaglossa. She bore him 6 children. My father was one of those 6 children. There's 3 boys and 3 girls. Of those 6 children, the oldest of the children was one by the name of Fortunato, Fortunato.
Mm-hmm.
He had a bunch of children, at least 5, because I know of 5 of his children, all boys, became college professors. Remember. Now, my father and his brother Joseph, the other 2 boys of the 6 children,
Mm-hmm.
were tailors. Now, my father, Antonino, Antonino, Costantino.
Who we have pictures of, by the way.
Huh?
We have great pictures
Yeah.
of.
And my father, at the age of 18, had built up a business of custom tailoring, the largest in the city of Lingua Glossa, which did between 18 and 20,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
on the slopes of Mount Etna, at an elevation of about 2,000 feet, 35 kilometers west of a summer resort called Taormina, Taormina, which is a very favorite place with the ritzy people of Europe. And Lingua Glossa was also 35 miles north of the beautiful city of Catania on the southeastern slope of Sicily. As I remember him telling me, the first time he left home before he opened up his business in his hometown, he spent a couple of years in Catania as a young man, and then he went back and he built this beautiful business that he had. At 18 years old, he had 4 custom tailors under him, where clothes were made for men, all to all, taking your measurements and everything was custom made. There's no such thing as, the Industrial Revolution hitting that town, or any part of it, as a matter of fact. And this is very early in the century, and very, very early in the century. And in any event, the other brother, Joseph, came to this country, I don't know, around 1808, 1809, somewheres in 8. Somewheres there. Now,
That was 1808 or 1908?
1908.
Yeah.
1908.
Okay.
1908, 1909.
Right, early 1900s. Right.
Now, as far as my father goes, he fell in love with my mother. And I'll explain about that particular thing. He fell in love with her, and the families didn't like my father. My father was a handsome devil, if there was a handsome devil. Very good looking, light complexion, so on. And, well, you know, he's working hard all day with the responsibility of a business. Very nice. He liked to go run around, okay? Have a drink or two, or have a supper or two out, you know. One of the things he used to say, taverna vida eterna. You know what that means? Well, taverna means inn.
Yeah.
Life eternal.
Okay.
He was kidding that way. Well, after 4 years, a secret marriage by notes. Why was the as I say, the love affair between my father and mother by notes? Because her family, my mother's family, wanted him to be, you know, sedate like their part of the family, which I will explain. Well, my father got tired, and so did my mother. They eloped on October the 24th of 1910, and the following, in February 1911, they migrated here to Albany, where his brother Joseph had moved before him. That's what brought him here to the city of
so
Albany.
Joseph was already here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Joseph
okay.
was already here.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let me give you a few words on my mother's side. My mother came from a great family for generations. Wow. When she came over, for over 200 years, they were all what they call Albanists, or master cabinet makers, who manufactured furniture, cabinetry, caskets, and all that kind. They
Anything
were
out of
very
wood that was
fancy.
quality.
Anything in wood. They sculptured in wood and everything else. Now, so when she left and eloped with my father, you can understand how upset my mother's family was. And my mother,
What was their family name? Hold on.
my mother's family name was Groy, S-G-R-O-I.
Uh-huh.
Her father was named Vincenzo Groy, V-I-N-C-E-N-Z-O. And the mother was named Anna Coletta, C-O-L-E-T-T-A. She bore Vincenzo, as I recall, I think it was 3 girls and 6 boys. 3 of the boys, all of whom were tailors, migrated to South America. I can't give you their names because I don't remember them. But they migrated to South America in Rosario, Santa Fe, north of Buenos Aires in Argentina.
Now, you said they were doing what? What were they? I thought they were carpenters.
No,
Oh.
3 of them became tailors.
Okay.
The others became carpenters
I'm with you.
and stayed around.
Okay.
See? And the other 3 girls were home, one of which was my mother, who eloped with my father to
Right.
come to this
Okay.
country. Now, you got to remember something about the culture at that time. One of the 3 boys of this particular marriage was a Padre Elia. At 13 years old, he entered the seminary. He completed all the studies at 19. He couldn't say Mass because he was too young. And he took up law. He became a lawyer to boot. And he said his first Mass at 21 years old was special dispensation by the Holy Father, or the Pope. The other 2 boys, I don't know what. One followed his father's footsteps, you know, in carrying out this cabinet trade, or what you want to call it. It's high albinistic trade, what the hell it's called. But any event, that was a family. You know, who's here, who was there. But the father and mother, and even the brothers and the brothers and sisters, not the sisters so much. My mother only had two sisters, and they were left. The culture there said that, well, you know, somebody's got to stay in the homestead, the old homestead, to take care of the old people.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? But my mother flew the coop, as I told you, and two sisters remained. One was named Maria Angela Zgroy, and the other was named Concetina. Concetina, Concettina. She was the youngest, a beautiful girl. They stayed and took care of Mom, who became blind at 80 years old and died shortly thereafter. Well, as far as I know about that part of the family, I can't tell you what happened to the boys that went down. Well, one of the tailors that went down to Argentina, he became a tie maker. He had a factory. As a matter of fact, when I was about 17 or 18 years old, I received one of the most beautiful ties of my life from him. Oh yes, I did. The best I could get from the priest, who was a tough cookie. He was a tremendous orator, besides, religious orator, besides being a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he belonged to the Carmelites,
Mm-hmm.
and he used to make his missions up and down to Italy and so on and so forth. But he was very, very, there were certain things that were a little bit odd about him.
Mm. And this would have been your uncle.
This is my uncle,
Mm-hmm.
my uncle. His name was Padre Elia,
Mm-hmm.
which in the Elia itself is a very powerful name. That's what it is, A-L-E-A, Padre. He was a Carmelite. And my mother-in-law, my own mother-in-law, went to see him in 1960. He had gotten out of the community of Carmelites and had become a parish priest in the city of Palermo, which is on the northwest coast of Sicily. And his rectory was bombed in World War II.
Mm.
And when my mother-in-law was there in 1960, she saw that they were finishing up this new rectory, and he wasn't there. But one of the neighbors nearby said, wait a few minutes, he'll be around. So he came, he finally showed up with bags or something or other. He had been shopping or whatever it was. My mother-in-law says, I recognize him right away because he said, Gone. And Maria, my daughter Maria, he says he walks just like you do, with your head cocked to the side. He had the same identical walk about to have that. This is something of the genes coming down through, And he made all kinds of excuses because he was absent. He made all kinds of excuses because he couldn't give them the proper, they say, attention that he should. But he brought them into the new rectory and showed them. And my mother-in-law found out, he says, he was making excuses, he says, but he wouldn't even have a housekeeper in our house. That's how close he was. He wouldn't even trust a woman in the house. Kind of a guy he was. This kind of thought. He was ordained in 1907, and he sent me personally his ordination, a 50th anniversary ordination card at 1957, and he died shortly thereafter. So as far as I was concerned, not as much as I can tell you now, as far as my father was concerned, he came here.
Let me just ask a couple of questions off the top.
Yeah.
You know how my grandfather and grandmother met? You didn't know anything about that?
How they met?
Yeah, did they meet? You know anything?
No, I don't
Yeah.
know, because
And Edie mentioned that she thought they met at a wedding, but she wasn't sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because over there, you got to remember, in those towns, they were, in those cities, that was really a small city. I mean, 10 times bigger than Clayton, New York.
Right.
That's a town, but that was a
20,000.
small city.
Yeah.
And the people migrated out of there because the big business that was, like you say, furniture making and so on, was gobbled up by one family, my mother's family.
Right.
And as far as tailoring is concerned, it wasn't a bad business, but my father and mother, I say, eloped to this country. They married, eloped, and migrated to this country because they couldn't stand the friction between the two families that they were. So my father came to this country, and I'm going to tell you something about my dad that people don't know. My dad was a very smart man. He had a, let's say, an illustrious background anyhow. See, his mother, Josephina Torquia, was a royal family lineage. Oh yes, she was royal lineage. He never talked about it too much, but he always wanted to change his name to Torquia. Yeah. And when he was here in Albany, he found out that he could not master the English language. For some reason or other, as smart as he was. Now, my father's great love was for sculpture. And because he had he had chronic bronchitis, where his lungs developed bigger because of the bronchi not being proper, he had to give it up when he was young, very young, and 6 months of it, that was enough, because it would kill him at a young age. So he kept that tailoring till he accomplished it. Now, my mother's father, Vincenzo Sgroi, not only had this nice business of furniture making and cabinet making and all that kind of stuff, he was the top musician in town. The city was proud of a 60-member band, of which he was the cornet leader, and he was the leader of the band. And they would practice for 9 months and go on tour for, not 9 months, they would practice for 3 months, I should say, and then go on tour for 3 months. And that's where my mother was a tremendous musician.
I know.
My mother could whistle, sing, or hum a complete aria from one end to the other. Years ago, when radio first started, we used to have the Metropolitan Opera House on Saturday afternoon. They used to call them the Saturday matinees, and they get the operas. And my mother and anybody came into that parlor where we had this big radio console. She would listen to that music of the opera. You would see her laugh, you would see her cry, because for 3 months with all these musicians practicing in her father's backyard, she learned all these operas. At 9 years old, my mother wanted to learn how to play the violin. Oh, no. The only good violin teacher in town, or in the city, was a man. Oh, that was taboo. That a male teacher would teach a young girl like that. So she never taught. She never learned the violin. But getting back to my father, he found out that the custom tailoring business in Albany was on the edge of going out for good. And the reason for it is this, that the Industrial Revolution of the 20th century, one of the first things they did was learn how to make custom-made suits. Rochester, New York was one of the centers where they got bolts of material and they used to make, 12, 20, 30, same suits, one size, and so on. Mass production and everything else, and some very fine suits. But they made size 38, 40, 41, 42, and all this kind of stuff, but one not necessarily always fit well. And the only problem that the custom-made suits had for sale was the problem that if it didn't fit you, somebody had to do the alteration work. So with this, I say the custom tailoring and all me dropped down. My God, there was all kinds of tailors. And my father's was specialty was making coats, beautiful coats and overcoats. Oh, I remember him working on his velvet college chinchilla coats, or camel hair coat. You wonder how he could see. Because at that time that I'm talking about, we didn't have electricity in the house. We had gas mantles. And if you walked too fast or too stomped across the floor, the mantle would bust. You had to put another mantle out.
So he worked in the house. He worked in the family house.
Yeah, he worked
in
in
the
the
house.
home by himself in the house, which was permissible at that time.
Uh-huh.
And that dropped down and dropped down and dropped down and dropped down. And there was only one guy left when he decided, I think I better go out and help these stores that had taken over, they'd taken over the men's tailoring, not the men's tailoring, but the men's suit business. They'd taken it over. And he was working for them. And he used to say he was such a good tailor that they never gave him a short a pair of pants for like that now. When they had to reconstitute a big job around the collar, or as I say, rebuild this and that, they gave him all the top alteration jobs. Because he was head and shoulders over the other, what they call bushelmen, they used to call them in those days. And that happened just about when the time I went to college.
Huh.
Oh, yes, I was 18 or 19. 29.
Uh-huh.
1929.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now, that's as far as I know about my family.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about where you all lived and the brothers and, the order in which they were born and everything like that. So we would have it.
I couldn't tell you that.
No, I'm talking about,
my
your
family?
brothers.
Oh, my
I'm
the oldest. I'm the oldest. I was born on August the 13th, 1911.
Mm-hmm. And you were living on Grant Street then? Where were you living?
No, I was not living on Grant Street. I was born on, where we went today through that maze of structures, concrete structures, bypasses, overpasses, down to everything else, down to on Westerlo. I was born on Westerlo Street, which is part of what you see there.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when I was 11 months old, that part of the city was kind of low. I was only 11 months old when they had a flood. And the water, my father was living in the first floor of this home on Lower Westerlo Street, and they had a picture of my mother carrying me and put her in the rowboat, and my father following in. The water had gone up about 7 or 8 steps right to the top step of the thing there and stopped, but it wasn't livable. They went elsewhere. They went on higher ground, so to speak. Now, Brother Jim was born, oh boy. Brother Jim, I think, was born on Swan Street, South Swan Street. Of course, he was born in, where did he go? He is 79 today, so he must have been born around 1914. In between, my sister was born, for instance, my birthday's on August the 13th, 1911. My sister was born on January the 6th, 1913. And the following year, about 13 in April, what's his birthday? The 17th, or April the 18th, Jim was born. Now, Jim is not Jim. I'll tell you something about that. I was baptized Domenico after my grandfather. My sister Josephine, next in line, was baptized under the name of Josefina that you heard me talk about. Jim was called Vincenzo, like my mother's father, his name. And but somewhere along the line, he's been known as Jimmy all his life. A lot of Vincenzos that came to this country, for some reason or other, their name became James. I don't know why the hell they ever did. But actually, when you write to him, it's Vincent A. Costantino. when he was playing in music and on a side, besides being a barber for years, used to call him JC. That was his nickname. That was his nickname. Now, the next one in line
Wasn't my dad.
was your dad. Now, your dad was born in August the 17th in 1918. I remember holding him in my arm as a little kid. Okay. Kid of what the hell was this? 7 or 8 years old. And he was not baptized Arthur. Your father's name was never Arthur. Your father's name was Adolfo. Adolfo. Well, knowing your father as you do, and as I did, he would never lift that. When he got old enough to change it by himself, he did.
Yeah.
He changed the name Arthur. A stands for Anthony. His godfather was named Anthony. And the last one, Louis. Louis was born, I remember the day he was born. It was on February the 17th in 1920. I was 9 years old at that time. And in those days, you got to remember, all the births were all done at home by midwives. And I remember this darn cold February winter day, I was put outside for 5 or 10 minutes. My mother was ready to deliver, and all of a sudden I heard a scream where she had delivered Louis. And the doctor was supposed to show up. He never showed up. He never showed up till this is about 10 o'clock in the morning that he was born. I can remember distinctly. I was a 9-year-old. I can remember distinctly. And I wasn't even, not quite 9 years old. But in any event, I can remember distinctly that in Mrs. Iosa, whose son was a classmate of mine in public school, grammar school, was the midwife. And she did a tremendous job. And the obstetrician shows up about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Years ago, they had horses with sleighs, and the sleigh was loaded, especially one that used to carry coal to various homes. In that day, anthracite coal was their favorite fuel for keeping homes warm, with these old cast iron stoves in the kitchen, and maybe a pot-belly stove in the parlor, one in the front of the house and one in the back of the house. Because cold water faucets in those days, And he came in at 5 o'clock. He looked at, everything is fine, Maria, because my mother's name was Maria Carmela. That's what her name was, Maria Carmela Sgrawley. Mm-hmm. And that's where, now something about the name of Louis, we call him Louis. He was baptized Lodovico, Lodovico. See, my dad used to like to read, especially romances, and when he liked any particular hero, the last 2 children, that's why he named your father Adolfo, and he got it from some romantic novel that he was reading, and he got the name Lodovico from another romantic novel that he was reading, and he named those. The 2 kids were smart enough to change their names. And that is the true story. They are. Now, as far as your mother is concerned,
let me just ask.
Not your mother, your grandmother. Your grandmother.
Let me just ask a question, Uncle Tom, if I might. So now, where were you living when the family? Was there a point in which you lived in Grant Street? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about Swan. You moved from down by the water to Swan, and then you moved to
Yes.
Okay.
We moved. Louis was born on Grant Street.
Okay.
That's where Louis was born.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Art was born on Madison Avenue. Okay. 98 Madison Avenue, which still exists.
Okay.
And Louis was born at 111 Grand Street. The Costantinos lived on the first floor and the basement. On the second floor lived your grandfather, your grandmother, and Edie,
Stannis.
Your mother wasn't born quite yet. She was born, I think, before they moved away from that house.
Mm-hmm.
And on the top floor, who lived? But your mother's sister, C. Fiorella, she was on the top floor.
Hmm.
Yeah, she was on the top floor. And at that time, only Polly was alive, as I remember.
Hmm.
I'm talking about quite a few years back.
Absolutely.
Sure. And I've forgotten who moved first. We didn't move at all. They both moved out before we moved out. I know your father and mother moved on Myrtle Avenue, not far from Lincoln Park. And the Fiorellos, I don't know where they moved. I did know that, I think they may have moved on to Hamilton Street.
For a while, I remember when I was growing up, they were down behind near St. Teresa's there, but I don't know at what point that was.
Oh yes, later on.
Later on.
Oh yeah, well,
Yeah.
just like your father,
Right.
just like your grandfather, moved to Forest Avenue.
Right.
He lived on Myrtle Avenue for a little while, and then he bought a home on Forest Avenue, a two-story
Right.
home on Forest Avenue. And the Fiorellos lived on Norwood Street.
Right.
On Norwood Street.
Okay.
On Norwood Street.
Yeah.
And that was about as far as I can go.
And you were going to say a little bit about the were you going to say something about the Stanishes?
The Stanishes, as far as the Stanishes, as I know, your grandfather was a big man. You know, remember
Right.
him?
Right.
He was a big man, and he used to work in the West Albany railroad shops. And he was well liked, and he was a supervisor or leader, so on and so forth. And he was a good worker, so on and so forth. But something happened somewhere where I don't know whether to put up a job or what. I say this to you, and it's not to be repeated. He was fired. Why? Somebody snitched at him that he had a short piece of brass pipe in his lunch basket. His lunch baskets in those days were really a basket. That high, that big. This guy, those hard-working people like Boilermakers and myself. Those people worked hard in trains those years ago. After that, your father, Peter, Pietro, Peter, he had a nightclub or something out at Lions Lake, I think, and then we didn't keep too much close in touch with him. Then I see him years later as a bartender for the bakery on the corner of Phillips Street and Madison Avenue. He was there. Then I saw him working for the city, driving a big truck.
Right. I remember those days when he drove the dump truck. Yeah.
Your mother was a lovely woman. Your mother was a lovely woman. I remember as a kid, because we lived in the same house, there was a little old lady living with you in your grandfather and grandmother's home. Pietro, see, your father was named Peter Stanish, his name was evidently Pietro Stanice. But they call him Stanish, Stanish. And your mother was a Bergella, Berghella. That was her maiden name, and she comes from the Bergella family. There were other Bergellas in the city of Albany. There were other. I don't know how related they were to your grandmother, but they were. She was a very fine woman, and there was a little old lady there that lived with them for a while. And she was your mother's, you can check this, your own mother, she was your mother's mother. I saw her on Grand Street. I don't remember after that, they moved away, whatever it was.
She's my mother's godmother. Now, my grandpa and grandma Costantino died relatively young. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
My mother moved to, I can tell you something about the background. During World War I, things were bad in Albany during the living. And my father's brother Joseph, who I told you, Giuseppe, had moved to Boston. So he told he wrote my father, why don't you come here? You can work here in a factory where they manufacture military uniforms. So my father and mother moved from Madison Avenue, Lower Madison Avenue, it was 98 Madison Avenue. We moved out to Boston. And we settled in the southern part of Boston where most of the fishermen lived.
Mm-hmm.
See, Boston has always been a fisherman's town.
Mm-hmm.
The fish from off the coast of Boston,
Mm-hmm.
tremendous, beautiful fish. And it's really on the supermarkets or anywhere, Boston fish is more highly regarded grade-wise than the fish that you catch off in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's still, as I say, it's still the, what do you call it, the Atlantic Ocean and everything else. And I remember the one year that we lived there, God, we were eating fish that was so damn fresh, you catch it in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, I went to first grade in Albany, and when we moved out there, I finished before I could finish the first grade in Boston, I went to George Washington School in Lower Boston, the grammar school, and I caught diphtheria. I was 6 years old, and I can remember to this day, laying in bed for a whole solid week. Diphtheria in those days was fatal, mostly fatal, until they developed what they call a Schick test. Shortly thereafter, well, maybe 3 or 4 years, something like that, they developed a Schick test, and they saved a lot of kids. So I almost died from the Schick test. Now, my father went to work in this factory and with his brother, and they were doing very well. But my mother could not stand the climate. Boston is cold in the wintertime, very, very penetrating cold. And she was sick all the time. In the meantime, I got caught with diphtheria, and I almost died. So my father and mother, we've had enough of Boston. All I can remember good about Boston was that I was a 6-year-old tyke. And they brought me out to the nearby Navy Yard, and there was a submarine tied to the docks. And they put me on the submarine, and the sailors were all attention and so on, you know, and give us a cook's tour and all the things. And I saw the torpedoes on the submarine and everything else. I never forgot that. To this day, I can still remember that, believe it or not. But we moved back to Albany, and we moved back to Albany. Albany on Madison area, Lower Madison area. The following year, I got the flu, the Spanish influenza. Now, there wasn't a day going by where the herds didn't go up and down Lower Madison Avenue 2, 3, 4 times. You got to remember, 2 million people died the Spanish flu worldwide. 2 million people died. They were worried how many people died in World War I. There was nothing compared to what I can still remember. They had, what do you call it again, a figure, you know, a rag doll or whatever you want to call it, made of the Kaiser, you know, running up and down Madison Ave. And I remember that as a kid. Oh, yeah. I have very good recollection of going back there in those years. I was very sick. Yeah. When we moved from Grand Street in Albany, we moved to Trinity Place. And this was back and at that time, your dad got diphtheria. But with the Schick test, we beat it. I had to get the Schick test. I said, I've already had diphtheria. Nothing doing, Dr. Castellano said. You got to take the test. You put a needle about this round, about this long into your abdomen. Yeah, that's where they thought. They served the Schick test. But after that, we bounced around quite a bit, you know. But we were always around the South End there, you know. My family in particular, After Madison Avenue, we lived, as I said, we lived on Grand Street. We moved to Trinity Place, was it? Or the other way around? I've forgotten around. It's always only. And then from there we moved up to way up Madison Avenue by Washington Park.
Mm-hmm.
We moved to Morris Street.
Mm-hmm.
Then we moved to South Swan Street. We moved to Irving Street. We moved to High Street, which we lived in a flat. In the back was the orphanage, the Sisters of Charity orphanage, and they were in back of the Executive Mansion.
I know that neighborhood. Yeah.
I remember, though, when we lived on South Swan Street, that was the year that I started to go to RPI.
Mm-hmm.
Governor Smith was around. He lived there. And his son, forgot what his name was, he was a year or two older than I, but he played with the rest of us just like he was a regular guy. He was a regular guy.
So you were off at college, and so then my grandpa and grandma died after you were off at college, huh?
Oh yeah, after all, I got out of. My mother lived after we left South Park Street, not High Street, but South Park Street. We moved to Delaware Avenue, 252 Delaware Avenue. And Mom, who had been sick all her life, that's why I have a great affection for my sister Josephine. Being the two oldest, my mother was sick so much that I was the oldest and Joe was the second. Lots of times, we were the babysitters and we took on chores and this and that. I used to know how to make a pot of soup when I was 10 years old. Iron starched shirts, do all the errands to Papa Mom's store. There were no supermarkets in those days.
Mm-hmm.
My father depended an awful lot on me for running errands, doing this and that, and got me in trouble in school there once where the principal says, "I don't believe you do what you say." So I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" "I want you to bring a note from your father." His name was Norton, Principal Norton. He's toughy. He was the head of 15 school when I went to there. He was the principal of 15 school when I first started school, and here I am with him in my, the 4th or 5th grade, whatever it was, and my father was depending on me. I was his delivery boy. And 9 years old, I personally myself would get paid for what my dad did from the tailor and the head tailor there on State Street who sold and so on. So my father made the coat, some other tailor made the vest, another one would make the pants, and you'd have a suit. Okay. You pay by check. Well, you go down and say, my father says, "Go cash a check." "Daddy, how am I going to cash a check?" I went down there, they wouldn't cash. I was only 9 years old. How can you expect me to cash a check? So the bank wouldn't cash a check. Nearby, though, on Madison Avenue, there's the Italian consul, a man with a beard, a very, very, really aristocratic and a polished consul. He was very, because he was right in the heart of the Italian immigrants that had congregated around that area. This was back around 1920, 21. And I went to him, I says, "Mr. Burr," his name was, it began with a B. It wasn't Bergella, it was Bergella or something like that, I forgot. As a matter of fact, he built a beautiful home on South Mountain Boulevard, and you can still see it today. And Bocelli, I think his name was Bocelli. Very nice man. I said, "Will you please cash my check?" My daddy, he's busy, he came. Every time the store that said, after that, every time he got a check, I used to go over to the Italian consul. He would cash my check without any.
So that, now, what year was it that my grandmother died first, right?
Yeah, she died. What happened was that when we lived on Delaware Avenue, 252 Delaware Avenue, my mother had severe high blood pressure. It was high. She was walking around the house with 250. That's extremely high. And she was going to a Dr. Hempstead, who was about the best diagnostician in Albany in those days. There were no internists. She was a real good family doctor. There were special doctors for neurotics and so on and so forth. But he was about the best in Albany. And 2 days before my mother died, she had gone to him and, Mary, I'm so happy. My mother said, your pressure's down low. It's down to 160. I'm so happy for you. Well, 2 days later, it was April 13th. It was a Saturday. And it was a blustery April day, you know, with snow showers and so on. Brother Jim was going to get married to Mary. So Jim, and not Jim, but Mary and Mom. I had come up from New York. I was working in New York at that time. I was an engineer and so on. I had come up from New York, and I was laying on because I had a cold. But there she was out there with Mary, running from store to store, you know, looking for furniture because they were going to get married and get settled. Well, about 2:45 in the afternoon, she arrived on, how you doing? Okay. She went into the bathroom, and I heard the glass slam in a hole, in, you know, a tile holder. I thought, what's going on? So I jumped out of that. There's my mother sitting on the kitchen chair. She had developed a stroke. So right away, I put her to bed. And there was a doctor across the street who was a pediatrician. But right away, I called him. I said, for immediate attention, because you just don't go out and get doctors in 2 minutes. Not when you got one across the street.
Right.
He came over right away, took him and said, you get a hold of your doctor. He didn't say a word to me. But I know he was not happy with what he saw. It happened on a weekend, on Saturday. Dr. Hempstead was not available, so Dr. Philippone came. Philippone at that time was the chief, had just left being the chief. He was in charge of medicine at the Albany Hospital. He spent 4 years residency in there, and he was the chief of medicine. He came down. He told me, he said, down. Your mother's a very, very sick. And she got the stroke. At that time, they didn't call it a stroke, they called it a cerebral hemorrhage. She got it right here in the neck, at the base of the brain, which paralyzed the brain, the heart, and lungs. Nothing they could do for her. Even today, what happened to Edie, your Aunt Edie? 11.5 hours she was gone. Now,
how old was she?
She was 51 years old.
51.
She was going to be 52 in May, and she died on April the 14th.
Yeah. Now, my dad would have been in his teens. How old would my dad have been then?
Your father at that age?
How about how old?
Well, he was born in 1918, so, and my mother died in 1940.
So he would have
My
been.
mother died in 1940.
He would have been 20.
He was only
22.
22 years old.
Right. Okay.
About 22 years old. Well.
And was he living at home?
I'm working now in New York.
Right.
My sister had gotten married before Jimmy, and she was living in Creighton, New York. Married the Park. I lived in Creighton, New York. And there's Lou and Art.
Was Jimmy living at home then? Jimmy wasn't living at home?
No.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd make it easier for him, and we moved downtown over on the corner of Phillips Street and Madison area, so he wouldn't have so much to walk, you know, and
Right.
so on and so forth. He was having trouble with his teeth. But he started to go down and down and down and down. You got to remember that my father went through an awful lot. Not only because Mom was sick, but he had a lot of sickness with the children. My brother Jim, by the age of 10, I can tell you a story here right now. I was about 14 years old in the first year of high school. Okay. And my mother got sick with double lobar pneumonia. We were living on Trinity Place. Double lobar pneumonia was the soft cold germ. They brought her up to the old Memorial Hospital. Nobody would give you a nickel that she would live the night. She went in the hospital at 106 fever. And my father said, a special nurse. And who did they get? St. Peter's Hospital was on North First. It was nothing else but a little bit of a hospital. And one of the nuns over there come over and administered to my mother. And Mom was delirious and everything else, but the nun got to her. She says, Mary, he called her Mary instead of Maria. He says, how many children have you got? She went like this. And when the nun saw that nun got top of my mother and worked on her because pneumonia comes to a climax, you know. And if you're able to make that crisis where you break the fever, you know, you live. If you don't, you die. And that nun, whoever she is, if she's got to be an angel. She's got to be a saint. She saved my mother's life. In those days, there were no antibiotics. Like when I had diphtheria, all I had for diphtheria was, not diphtheria, but the flu in those days was quinine.
Right.
I almost died from diphtheria myself back in 1918 because they were giving me so much quinine, I was urinating blood and killing me. Oh my God, I used to burn and everything else. But getting back to my poor mother, that poor woman, she made it. And she was only a young woman. I was 14. She was only about 37. She's a young woman with 5 children. She made it. 1 week later, right to the day, Brother Jim was sleeping with me and Art was sleeping in the other place. And my father was running back and forth to the hospital with Mom. And here Jim comes down sick, and so does Brother Art. Well, the doctor comes down and get these kids to the hospital as soon as possible. So the Albany City Hospital sent them down, sent an ambulance down, and I'm the father of the house at 14 years old, my sister Joseph. Lou was a towhead, the youngest one in the family, and towhead, you know, what he was, I forgot, 5 or 6 years old, 4 years old, whatever it was. He was a towhead. And these guys come in, I'm the father of the house. Our house was always filled with people, with all kinds of friends and relatives and everything else. When we needed them most, there wasn't an adult around. I helped those residents put my 2 brothers in the ambulance, and I bawled one of them out. I said, please, put a blanket on. And they went to the Albany Hospital. Jimmy came down there not making it. At that time, that was his 4th trip with pneumonia. He was very, very sick. Your daddy made it. Your daddy made it. Your daddy, when he was young, he was sick quite often. My father was worried about him because he wouldn't gain weight and this and that and everything else. Brother Jim was more robust and so on, but he was a hell of a my God, what Brother Jim did in his youth, talk about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. He made them look like sissies. He was something.
Okay, what do you kind of stop me?
Getting back to my father now.
Yeah.
They'd gone through an awful lot of trouble. in his work, in the health of his family, and all this and that and everything else. And then of all things, they were, my father and mother were known as the sweethearts of the South End.
I heard that. Aunt Edie used to say that my
They were known as
grandfather
the
used to
sweethearts of the
bring
South
flowers
End.
to her every day.
Oh, what he did, my father, every Saturday night, I would take Mom down to the corner of State and Pearl. My father would come out from Stiefel Brothers, and they'd go out and eat together and take in a movie or something like that. That was a Saturday night. Another ritual they had was, while we were growing up there in Trinity Place, which was years before that, I was 10, Josephine was about 9. We were known as stepfather and stepmother because we were putting the kids, making them behave, making the 3 kids behave. And that's the story. So, but getting back to my father, after going through so much and everything else, after my mother died, I learned later on that if it wasn't for the love of his children, he would have destroyed himself. He was going down and down. He was having trouble with his teeth. He had the best dentist in Albany working on him. And he never could get used to false teeth, the appliances, partial appliances. He had one. But in any event, he was going down and down and down. He got pneumonia after about a year. Because he liked it. We had a porch in the back, nice and breezy. He fell asleep out there, and it was cold or something. He got pneumonia. He got over it, no problem at all. Then, after my mother died, I got engaged to my wife, Frances. And my father was in the middle of it. My wife, Frances, loved my father better than she loved me, I think. Because he had the Italian culture. You got to remember, my wife was an Italian, not an American.
Mm-hmm.
She was really of the Italian culture, of
Mm-hmm.
the seas of the Mediterranean there. And he just, the day we got engaged, he took sick. On the 27th of July. Called the doctor, Philippon. He said, I can't get Dr. Philippon. I sent Dr. Meckler. And I knew Dr. Meckler because he and I went to RPI when he was getting pre-med at RPI before he went over to Europe to study medicine. And he said, your dad's got something wrong with his liver. I said, down. He knew me well. He says, tomorrow, he says, get a hold of Philippon right away. They put him in the hospital, and they diagnosed what he had. He had acute monocytic type leukemia. When I heard this, leukemia, at that time they were calling it anemia, because that's what it was, a form of anemia, that's what they thought. They didn't know how to treat it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how to treat any form of leukemia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my father, and this is the truth now, my father, I bothered everybody here in Albany. I wasn't satisfied. I was working in New York. I got blood slides of his blood and everything else. They're given to me. And I looked up a doctor. I went to the head of the Reconstruction Hospital in New York, which is one that does a lot of bone work, and they work with a lot of leukemias and everything else. And I was referred to him by an intelligence officer of the Navy because I was working with the Navy, and he didn't charge me nothing. But how does this help? Your father got acute type leukemia, monocytic type leukemia. He says to me, don't beat the brain around it. You can't, nobody can do a damn thing about it. I wasn't satisfied. Then I found out that at the Cornell Medical School in New York City, he was the top man for blood on the Eastern Seaboard, a fellow by the name of Dr. Resnikov. I brought the blood smear to him and so on. He took one look at it. Well, charged me $25. No, $25 a lot of money.
Yeah.
And he wrote a letter to Dr. Philippone and people up there. There's nothing that can be done for that man except to make him as comfortable as possible. And so everybody's looking to me to make decisions. You could give him blood. In those days, what they thought of, you give him blood. And I said, if he's got this disease, he's going to die all over again. Understand that?
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember that. Something told me, don't give him any transfusions. Well, for years and years, well, anyway, to make a long story short, the last 2 weeks that he was alive, we noticed he was sick on July the 27th, and he died on August the 29th. 5 good weeks.
Yeah.
That's all. That's what they call a hasty leukemia. And for years and years, I always wondered if I had rendered the right decision, because Aunt Josephine, Art, Louie, and everybody else, Kumbag, they used to go see Dr. Philippone. He said, well, you know, they found out that you can give them a blood transfusion. He said, but I don't think it'll work anyhow.
Yeah.
But I take it on my shoulders. I said, why make this man die all over again? I just was thinking, after what I heard from the top notches down in New York City, like Resnikov and this other doctor here, the head of the Reconstruction Hospital, I said, no. Well, do you know, for years I had that on my mind.
Mm. Tough decision.
And I went to a wedding here about 10 years ago. Not even now, it was 10 years, 7 years ago. Or 10 years ago, it was after my wife died anyhow, with my daughter. And I met the head of the blood department, whatever you call it, at the VA hospital. I talked to him. I says, has anything been done with acute monocytic type leukemia? Now this is almost 40 years, was it? My father died in 41, only 16 months after my mother died. Mm-hmm. That's right. He said, when we diagnosed status, we write the book. And we died of death certificate. And he died in 16 months. I buried both of them within 16 months. Mm-hmm. But I always had this damn thing in my mind. In my mind.
Yeah.
Now I found out 2 years ago, they're able to put it in recession for a while. But they have no cure.
Yeah. It's just delaying the inevitable.
So that is. He was 54. Mm-hmm. He was 54, and my mother and father were born in May, both. My mother was born on the 31st of May, and my dad was born on the 6th of May. Mm-hmm. And they were 1 year and 25 days apart.
Now,
I remember.
When my grandfather died, let's see, was all the family working? I mean, how did they make ends meet at that point? Were they all off kind of working? You were working. Was Jimmy Barber by then?
Oh, Jim was working.
And Josephine was gone. And Louis and my dad
did
were
almost
working.
everything he wanted. And he was that way. I could tell a story about Uncle Jim.
That's hard to imagine because he's so quiet. He's so quiet and low key now, but I guess he was a real hellraiser, huh?
Well, he's one kind of a guy. He didn't like schooling. I mean, right? He didn't like schooling because years ago, when you didn't behave in school, especially he was the kind of a guy, they whack you with a yardstick or they whack you with a ruler across the knuckles. And I wasn't a bad kid at all, really. Because at 9 years old, I was wearing and working.
Yeah.
She had a 4th grade teacher that you right across the knuckles with a ruler, and then she couldn't hit you with the ruler. She had a yardstick, right? Her name was Mrs. Shields. I remember to this day. But Jim, he was in the 6th grade, and they dropped him down to the 4th. He'd go up to the 5th grade, and drop him down to the 7th. It was one of those kind of guys who couldn't get along with teachers. Just couldn't get along with teachers. Well, Then he was playing hooky from school. So they, after two sessions of it, I had to appear in court for it twice. The first time when he gypped so much school, you get it. The second time, I had to get a lawyer then. I had to get a lawyer that time because he was 13 years old. He had achieved the 6th grade. He never graduated from grammar school. He was a very, very, I wouldn't say smart. He was smart in his way. I mean, he became a musician and he never took a professional lesson. And in the capital district, he was the best guitar player there was. Not only that, during World War I, because he had a cyst on the bed on his spine that could not be operated on, he was working the Eastern Seaboard, Jersey, down as far as Virginia and everything else, with a trio playing music. That's right. And he did that, and then was a musician, self-taught. He could read, write, and arrange music. Now he's got all of that. Before that, he was boxing. He was in the amateur fight, and he would have gone a long way. He was very fast, and he could hit like a mule. His round shoulder, he could hit like a mule. But my mother heard about it, and that was the end of it. And before that, at 14 years old, he was out dancing. Years ago, they used to have these ballrooms all over the place. He would come home in the middle of the winter with his shirt and undershirt. You could wring them out like this. Here's a guy. And I say, anything he undertook, he perfected it. But with the dancing, he used to win all kinds of clubs. In those days, they didn't give any money out. They gave you some kind of a
memento
cup or some bone like that, And that's all story. So then he got in. How did he become a barber? Very simple. My father knew the trouble that he had with him and everything else. One day, he had art. It must have been art. He had art, and he's going through the motions of shaving them. In those days you had a brush, and he was shaving, shaving the father. What the hell, So my father said, I'll be son of a gun. So he knew an old man was a barber. He was childless. And he was going to school 11 at that time. 11 years old he was. Oh, and he was a great roller skater. He could roller skate on pavement like an ice skater, make the figure eight and everything else on roller skates. You have no idea the talent that guy has. And he come from school 11 right into Hamilton Street barbershop off the road. I'm telling you, this is like the movies. But he had a pension, and he had a couple of real good teachers. At 14 years old, he was the first class mechanic, making full barber mechanic wages. At 14 years old. But all these side issues were after, as I say, his great love for dancing, and he tied it. Then his great love for boxing. You take any people here years ago who knew about boxing and used to see them fight down in Oddfellows Hall or whatever the hell they were, they remember it all the time. And then as far as the musicians were, how he learned, he picked up a guitar that had been left in the house by a friend of mine's dad. Bing, 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 boom, 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 bing, 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 boom.
Really talented guy.
Well, it was in his genes.
Yeah.
His grandfather,
That's right.
Vincenzo,
That's right.
had six. He was the band leader of 60 musicians.
Yeah.
His mother was a musician. Really, she was loved for music.
Yeah.
My father loved music.
Yeah.
He took it up just like that. I had taken up the violin, and gee, I was only 9 or 10 years old. I had gotten to the sixth position on the fiddle. I was pretty good at it. But I was getting tired of it. I don't want to play for other guys. The teacher I had says, he told me, he says, Tony, says, I can't do any more with Dom. He says, he's doing very well. He said, I got to send him to another teacher. And he says, yeah? I said, well, he says, I'm going to tell you now, Tony, you're not going to get away with $1 a week. This teacher's going to charge you $5 for each lesson a week.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
So, in those days, a lot of money.
Yeah.
So here I am, you know. Instead of playing the kid, hey, Don, drop that, come on, we got to play. Because I'm looking for a chance to play. I have so many responsibilities on my show. Anytime I get a chance to do it, I dropped it. I dropped it, fellow. But I love music.
Uncle Don, you were telling me the other night about the village, the history of the village, and the history of the village, and the sort of miracle when the lava was coming down. I found that pretty interesting. I mean, it's kind of is it a myth or?
No, not at one time. Well, for years and years, always would erupt, and since Lingoglossa is only 2 feet above sea level, but it's on the slopes of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go all around the woods, you know, and all the foliage, it's one of the prime areas in the world for raising filberts. Almonds, but mostly filberts. Oh, yes. And other stuff like that, you know. And they were so close to the seashore and everything else, they could, all kinds of fish. In those days, you know, without refrigeration, fish was caught in the morning. It wasn't sold like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You had to throw it out.
Right, because it would go
The
bad.
poor fishermen had to throw it out. And all I can think about that. It was a nice city. It was settled by a prince of Lingoglossa. Where he came from, I can't tell you. That would be old history somewhere. But in any event, it's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful city. It says the air there is so 2,000 feet above sea level and 35 kilometers away from the sea.
Yeah, must
You've
have
got that beautiful. You would get snow once in a while, but it wouldn't last at all. It wouldn't last at all. You know, but it would erupt every now and then and destroy town. And this one particular time that it erupted, the flowers that it ripe, the Lingoglossa. That kept going. That stuff is just liquid stuff, you know. It just burns everything in its way and keeps going. And they had this holy man by the name of Egidio. Egidio, that's where that name, I don't know where it comes from. But his name was Egidio anyhow. And he got to a certain spot where the lava was coming down, and he put his cane. I think there was an elderly man. And he prayed so hard, please let it go no further. And it literally stopped at the cane that he was holding. And now he was made a saint. Oh yeah, he was a miracle worker. He was a miracle worker. As a matter of fact, a lot of the inhabitants of that town were called Egidio. Yeah. Of course, Sicily, the island of Sicily, you got to remember, for centuries and centuries, was you might call the pawn of all the wars. Everybody who won the war down there would take over Sicily. So when you go into the island of Sicily, you'll see the ancient ruins of Greece, like in Syracuse, Syracusa, the name like our Syracuse. You'll see Greek, all the remnants of Greek, what they had built, Greek columns and everything else.
Yeah.
If you go down further near where my wife was born and raised, Agrigento, you'll see.
Oh, she was Sicilian too?
Huh?
Was she Sicilian too? Aunt Frances?
She was born near Agrigento.
I didn't know she was Sicilian.
She was born in Siculiana.
Yeah.
She was 19 years old when she came here.
That's a long time to be. Yeah.
And see over there, their grammar school goes to 6 years, and what they teach you in sixth grade And what they teach the kids, at 12 years old, they're finished. After that, they go to become an artisan or something,
Mm-hmm.
or go to a mid, I don't know, a form of junior high but limited high, but you would go. It's a 3-4 years school, and so on and so forth. My wife didn't do that. My wife, instead of going to that, went with the sisters, who had a very good institution for teaching home economics of all forms. That's where my wife learned how to become a seamstress, lay down a bolt of material, take your measurements, and make it. She made Sarah Norton's wedding dress, and not only that, she could make a dress for herself. I got a smoking jacket that she made for me, but she was a great seamstress. One thing, she could crochet and knit and stuff like that.
Lauren
But the
still has a
thing that
blank.
she used to do, what they call cut linen work. You know what cut linen work is?
No.
I'll show you. I got one hand. Sculpture in wood. She would make picture frames and sculpture.
No, that's mentioned. I sort of remember.
Ceramic work.
I sort of remember your house in was it Pearl Street? Was it Pearl?
Was that?
I remember being in your house, and when I was a little kid growing up, was it Pearl Street that you were living on when
Pearl?
Where were you? It was downtown. That when I used to visit, I could still remember a flat where you and Aunt Frances would live Tony and Maria and Paul. I remember you used to have a pheasant in the living room.
It was Trinity Place, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
Trinity Place. You know where Trinity Place is? It's a block west of Pearl Street.
Yeah, it was down around Pearl that you used to live. I remember that.
Across the street of the Trinity Institute.
Right. I can remember that. I can remember that house and that neighborhood. I can see that living room very clearly. I remember going over and like to play.
Brother Jimmy did. My father and mother went to a Monday night movie. I don't know what the hell Jimmy had done during the day. Every Monday night they used to go to the Regent.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my father and mother lived in the bedroom and an alcove off the living room. So they come in during the night and all this and that, and all of a sudden they get something smashes on the floor and everything else. They put on the lights, and what the hell you think of? A frame of a motorcycle right in a bottle. I'm telling you, I always had the intention, because you got to remember that for 2 years I was a professional secretary.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote over 50 papers, technical papers, but I also wrote way more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Please believe me. And I made a living on it, and I was good at it. I said, one of these days when I retire, I'm going to sit down and go to the gym. I said, just like what my brother Jim did. I said, well,
that would be a story in and of
itself. That won't be a bestseller.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've heard about that about Uncle Jim, that he was.
Oh, Uncle Jim.
But you know, you look at him now and he's so kind of quiet.
Your
so
dad was
soft.
different. Your dad was different. Your dad, all right, he was a normal young man who liked to go out on dates and this and that. Uncle Lou was the same way, and then War II came on there. Oh boy, you don't know how lucky you were to have a father come back from what he went through over there. I don't know if you ever told him.
Oh, he told me the stories of, it's incredible. He was there. He was there for all of the worst of it.
Yeah, but you never heard any stories from Uncle Lou. Uncle Lou went in.
He was in the
in
Pacific.
January, and he was on Guadalcanal that following May.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he withstood 130 aerial bombardments on Guadalcanal alone. Where the bombardment's so great, you'll be bleeding from the ears, all over and so on.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to eat, you had to kill a Jap and rob his mess kit. This is the gospel truth. After that, the Army came in with the refrigerators and everything else. You ought to hear my talk. But I could always say, I used to write email to my brother Lou and Bernard. Lou and I For some reason or other, we had a way, and I knew when my brother was going into battle. After they were in the battle, you know, they would go to New Zealand, or they would go to Australia, okay, rest up, blah, blah, blah. I would get a mail every week, V-mail.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times he didn't have no V-mail. He'd get a piece of, because he was very, very astute on his Amtrak, and the squad leader on his Amtrak, he got a piece of lock paper, so on and so forth, and stick it together with the glue or anything that stuck together, and he'd make an envelope, he would write on it, then he had a way of putting it together with anything that was gunky and send it to me. I wish I had kept those things, I never did. But when I saw, I knew right away. Every week I received them. Then all of a sudden I wouldn't receive anything for 5, 6, or 7 weeks. I said, my brother's fighting somewhere or going to fight somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell he was all over.
Yeah, I remember.
West,
it was all over.
he had his
Pacific.
99 missions in 2 years. The last place he left was they picked on him of all guys, to teach the army, show the army where the Japs were hidden in the caves. No matter what kind of tractors you had, be they tractors for the beach or so on, with that cord over there, the thread on the tractor would be all eaten up inside of 20 minutes travel.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't go any further. But Lou knew where they were. He showed them where they were. He got up close to the cave, you know, get close to the cave, and it had given him, and his people ever was, a new type of flamethrower. Go in there and run away.
Mm-hmm.
Billy won't tell us. He buried 177 Japs on Pelabo alone.
Mm-hmm.
He fought at Cape Gloucester and a couple other places.
Mm-hmm.
He picked up was it 199 or 9, whatever it was. He came back home. And when I picked him up at the Grand Central Station, he was green.
Mm.
His color was green, believe it or not. Of course, Malaya had a lot to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
but his color was green. And his eyes were very furtive, like this,
Mm.
constantly.
Mm.
I thought, he was more of an animal than he was a human.
He had been in that was some of the worst fighting in World War II, that cave fighting when the Japanese were in there. They weren't going to come out of those caves from what I've read and seen. Some of the worst of it.
Oh, no. And he lost a lot of buddies and everything else.
Yeah.
He was lucky. He said some of those Japs were hitting our boys right between the eyes. That's what sharpshooters they had. Everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But he did a job. After that, he would never, my brother Louis will never say to me what he did in the war. Never. Brother Art did. He was telling me how they caught a bunch of Germans once in a cellar, and they all running by the window and throwing in those hand grenades.
Yeah.
He told me about that.
My dad. I remember my dad's.
Did he ever tell you about the time he got bombed out of a building?
Yeah.
And left in the field for 14
dead.
hours before Major Tatum, who happened to know him. I think he was a major that married him and Mom.
Yeah. They left him for dead.
So he says, that man's, I think he saw him move. He wasn't still alive. They had left everybody there for dead.
Yeah.
And that's when he went into about 5 months in what do you call it again, in a hospital. And that was the end of fighting for him. And that's when they sent him into Paris and to see to break the black market was on.